Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let us praise our gratitude to God who has bestowed His blessings and mercies so we can gather here in this beautiful time and beautiful meetings. Welcome to International Guest Lecture with the topic Energy and Water Resources Management Research at UNSW Sydney. Ladies and gentlemen, this event is conducted hybrid settings. There are participants who joined online. We wish that you could join us here in person. With thanks to the Honorable Associate Professor Julian Cox from University of New South Wales, Sydney. Thank you very much, sir, for being here with us. Welcome to Institut Teknologi PLN. Vice Rector 4 of Institut Teknologi PLN, Associate Professor Dr. Pawenari, IPU ASEAN Engineering, Dr. Widya Nita as International Academic Relation Manager, Dean of Infrastructure and International Technology of Institut Teknologi PLN, Dr. Kamala Hayati, Institut Teknologi PLN Management, and all the participants. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce myself. I am Nurhini Syamsul, Information System Students at Institut Teknologi PLN, who will guide this event until it's completed. Ladies and gentlemen, our agenda for today, there are singing Indonesian National Anthem, along with welcome speech from Rector Institut Teknologi PLN that will be delivered by Vice Rector 4 of Institut Teknologi PLN, continued by documentation session, presentation from our speaker, Associate Professor Julian Cox, followed by Q&A session, deliver appreciation, and it will end by closing. Let us proceed to our first agenda, which is singing Indonesian National Anthem, Indonesia Raya. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand up. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seat back. Thank you. Let's move on to the next agenda, which is welcome speech from Rector of Institut Teknologi PLN that will be delivered by Associate Professor Dr. Pawenari, IPU ASEAN Engineering, as Vice Rector 4 Partnership and Business Department. So without further ado, we would like your time to give a welcome speech.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everybody. Special Associate Professor Julian Cox. In Indonesia, same with you. In Indonesia name Yanto, Ias Yanto. reserve with you. Thank you, sir. From University New South Wales, Sydney, Australia, a very warm welcome and high appreciate for coming. Para dekan, Kaprodi, and International Relation Bu Widya, thank you for the process the activity today. One of the activity is we have the international guest lecture visiting in campus today. Regard from my rector, special for you, sir. Sorry, this is the process saya sedih kalau mikir ini. I said our team kolega is passed away last yesterday. I thought go to Pak Iwan. We have the 4 faculty in Institute Teknologi PLN. The first is the electrical and new renewable energy. The second is faculty infrastructure and regional. The third is the faculty telematica energy, and the last faculty for the technology and business energy. This is from activity from regional and infrastructure technology Bu Kemala, and environment teknik lingkungan. This is the very good, very expert for the activity. I think if we have 6 faculty make the event every week, we have every time to the guest lecture international activity today is very good. Other than international guest lecture, we also the other international event. I talked with Pak Julian, guest lecture and collaboration, e-mobility Indonesia and US NW Sydney. This is we have the international activity Institute Teknologi PLN. Talking about tema today is energy and water, energy and water. We know this is the energy and water consumption for the utility, but this is many process in the, we must know with Pak Julian talking about utility, the process. This is the energy, water, wind, after that steam, gas. This is the utility program. We can do the efficiency, productivity, optimize Indonesia very many supply process to one. The electric Indonesia is PLN. Maybe can make it the diesel and solar PV, the water rebore pump, and the process the water treatment plant to the drink water. After that, the wind from the compressor. This is the energy process, mechanical engineering, and steam the boiler system. This is many process. We can the maintenance and productivity the product, and this is the student and the lecturer can make the research together as well. ITPLN is the right choice for the discuss for the energy, because ITPLN one of university in Indonesia focus the electricity. Once again, thank you for your coming and success for the seminar. All audience by lecturer and student enjoy for the seminar and discuss with Pak Julian. Thank you.
Thank you, Associate Professor Dr. Paulinari, IPU ASEAN Engineering. Ladies and gentlemen, before we start the main agenda for today, please remain your seat because we will take some documentation. And I would like to invite Public Relations Institute Teknologi PLN to take a documentation for our event for today. And also would like to invite Associate Professor Julian Cox and Associate Professor Pawenari to stand up in the middle of the audience to take a documentation for our agenda today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much, Associate Professor Julian Cox and Associate Professor Dr. Pawenari. Ladies and gentlemen, now we will move on to our main agenda, a presentation from Associate Professor Julian Cox from University of New South Wales, Sydney, and followed by Q&A session. This agenda will be led by a moderator. Before that, let me introduce you to our moderator today. This is Candidate Dr. Nadia Paramita, STMT. She is one of the lecturer in Environmental Engineering Study Program at Institut Teknologi PLN. There are some of her expertise. There are industrial and domestic wastewater, environmental sanitation, solid waste, and remediation. Mrs. Nadia Paramita also have done her studies and become a Bachelor of Environmental Engineering at Universitas Diponegoro and continued Master of Environmental Engineering at Institut Teknologi Bandung, and now still ongoing to become a Doctor of Environmental Engineering at Universitas Indonesia. Mrs. Nadia Paramita also have joined some international forum such as International Workshop on Promoting Sustainable Protections and Restoration of Soil and Groundwater Environment in Taiwan. And also Mrs. Nadia Paramita have ever joined training and dialogue programs on sewage works management in Japan and training in water and wastewater infrastructure in Germany. So let me kindly invite this is Candidate Dr. Nadia Paramita, STMT.
Check. Okay. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the international guest lecture with the topic of energy and water resources management research at the University of New South Wales, Sydney, Australia. It's a great pleasure for me to be here and to be the moderator of this event. And this event conducted in hybrid setting, so therefore I would like to also welcome and hi to the participants who join online, and we hope that you could join us here in person. First of all, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Nadia Paramita. I'm a lecturer of Environmental Engineering Studies program, and in this opportunity, please allow me to introduce our guests. The slide, please. Yeah, this is it. Associate Professor Julian Cox. So, Professor Julian Cox is the Associate Dean International, ADI, Faculty of Engineering, UNSW, Sydney. Professor Julian Cox holds bachelor, honor, and PhD degree in microbiology and food microbiology from the University of Queensland. After spending some time in industry, he took an academic position at the UNSW Sydney, recently celebrating 30 years of affiliation. Wow, let's give applause. It's a long journey. Throughout the role, he worked closely with the food and diagnostic industries, particularly the poultry industry, while also holding faculty executive role in education and international recruitment and partnership. Though semi-retired, he still teaches at multiple universities. He currently serves at UNSW as an Associate Dean, International and Emerging Markets in the Faculty of Engineering. Now, please welcome our special guest, Associate Professor Julian Cox, and give a big applause for Professor. Yeah. Nice performance. Yeah, you can come.
Oh, terima kasih.
Hi.
Selamat siang. Nama saya Julian Cox. Saya Belasar dari Sydney, Australia. Saya belajar di UNSW Sydney. That's the end of my bahasa. If I could have the slides, please.
Okay.
Oh, and just while they bring them up, there's something else I have to do.
Iya, enggak sih. Belum masuk ke itu.
Is it frozen? Maybe straight into the pool.
Almost. Okay. Yeah. Later.
Yeah.
Nah, okay.
Once again, terima kasih banyak for having me here. I thank both the Institute and also our UNSW team here in Jakarta for bringing us together. It really is nice to be here and actually to be able to speak to such a large and young audience. My students tend to look a little older than you, but the youth is the future of Indonesia, and you are fortunate, I think, in this country that is one of your resources that you have such a youthful population, which is not the case in Australia. We are an ageing population, and that's unfortunate. But I think you have a very bright future because you have so many youths with so much potential. So you've heard the introduction. I'm from UNSW Sydney. It is one of the top universities in Australia, and indeed it is currently ranked globally as 19th in the world. And for engineering, we are ranked number 1 in Australia and as high as number 5 in the world. Now, what I'd like to do today is really three things. One is to explain briefly to you the relationship between Australia and Indonesia, and particularly through the lens of UNSW Sydney. I'm then going to give you what might be the core of the talk, a little overview of what we do in our faculty in relation to water and energy, and that will be kind of a snapshot. We could talk for hours, if not days, about the range of activities that we have. So I'm going to give you some sense of what we do with water and energy and some examples. And then I'm going to finish with a case study of water and energy recycling from my own research. So you get a sense of just one project, but in some depth. Okay? So in terms of the relationship with Indonesia, it's been a long one. UNSW received students from Indonesia, the first students to come as masters and PhD candidates, in 1953. So last year we celebrated that 70-year anniversary, and particularly for the doctoral candidates, they returned to Indonesia and became a number of the very senior professors in various areas and across Indonesia to help the academic development of this nation. So we're very proud of that fact that we were the first university in Australia to help build the academic leadership in this country. And this is just a couple of examples. In fact, just last week in Bandung, I met again with Professor Suharto, I should say. He's considered the grandfather of tempeh production in Indonesia. Again, one example of a true leader who started his academic career through UNSW and returned to Indonesia and had a significant impact on your nation. In reverse,
Recording
of course,
stopped.
Oh, time's up already?
No. Continue, please.
Yeah. So, hi folks. So in terms of, from our side, of course, we've trained many students over many years from Indonesia, and this is just one of perhaps the best example at UNSW. Rosa Mal came to UNSW as an undergraduate student from Medan, and she completed her bachelor's honours and PhD degrees at UNSW, and she is now is one of our most famous research professors. She leads a very large group, and I'll mention her again a little later. And of course, I have played, I guess, my own role in building the relationship between UNSW and Australia and Indonesia in various ways. Of course, as an academic, I have taught dozens of Indonesian students over my 30-year career, and that includes just this short list of students who completed undergraduate or postgraduate thesis projects with me. But also the fact that we've collaborated in various ways, and a really good example that relates directly to Indonesia is this. And you're probably not aware of this, and remember that I'm a microbiologist, I'm not an engineer, I'm a food safety specialist, but you may or may not be aware that you have had for many years a significant food safety issue in the country. It's not well publicised, but you all know tempeh, of course, right? Yeah? Everyone knows tempeh. What's it made from typically? Soybeans, right. But in certain parts of the country, there is a product that's made from coconut press cake, the waste material, if you like, from making various coconut products. And poorer people use that to make a tempeh, and sometimes it fails, and there is a bacterium that grows and it causes a very severe illness, an intoxication in people, called tempeh bongkrek, food poisoning. And Embit Kartadama, who is mentioned here, along with Ken Buckle and myself, have researched and written about this organism. Further still, in terms of research, I've mentioned the fact that many years ago we started to receive academic staff or people who would become academics and professors here in Indonesia. And indeed, just in recent times, these are three of my PhD students who have, Julia worked on green soybean tempeh. Arlene worked on a seaweed coagulant to help make cheese. We call it sea cheese. And Uli has worked on coffee fermentation, and coffee is another commodity that is very significant to the Indonesian economy. I've also had the chance, and I think one thing that didn't get mentioned is that I spend a lot of time in Australia, not just in teaching and researching, but also I spend time in delivering, communicating science in various ways. This is just one example where Benji is actually an Indonesian who lives in Sydney, and he brings in specialty coffee from Indonesia. So he's another part of the relationship where he's exposing Australians to the wonderful coffee that is produced in this country. Of course, there's the business. Higher education is a very important part of the Australian economy. In fact, after a couple of mining industries like mining iron ore, higher education is the next biggest part of the Australian export economy. So it's very significant. So aside from being an academic and doing those teaching and research things, which we'll come to, I do spend a bit of time doing business. At times I even wear a suit, but I'm very happy to be in Batik today. And so we have open day events, we do training of agents and counsellors, but also student mobility. And I think that was mentioned, that it would be nice in terms of collaboration to think about people who might come from your institute to Sydney, as well as us bringing students to Indonesia. And indeed, this is what you see here, that what brought me to Indonesia on this particular trip was a student mobility project funded by the Australian government under what we call the New Colombo Plan. And this was a collaboration between ITB, UNPA, Parahyangan, and UNSW, with an international student conference, as well as industry and cultural visits, to expose our students to all things Indonesia. And again, it would be wonderful if perhaps we could see the same thing happening, where students from Indonesia, maybe from this institute, could come and visit with us. So in terms of partnerships, of course, we already have a number of academic partnerships here in Indonesia. And you can see some of the ones that are probably recognisable. And not necessarily just with engineering. For instance, BINUS, we have a relationship through our business school. Oh, we need to add another symbol. Yeah, maybe next time. It'll be on the slide. Excellent. But of course then, UNSW being a very applied university, and particularly through the Faculty of Engineering. Faculty of Engineering has somewhere between 600 and 700 industry partners, locally and internationally. And of course, late last year, after a couple of visits, we've signed an agreement to work with the state-owned energy company, PLN. And of course, I understand, if I'm referring to it correctly, that the PLN Institute here is the child of PLN, but I think the grown child, correct? It has kind of left the nest and it operates quite independently. And of course, what we've seen with that is, and very recently while I was here in Jakarta, we were able to welcome, on departure from Indonesia, 12 students from PLN, the company, who are coming to undertake postgraduate study and PhDs with us at UNSW. So the relationship there is already strong, and we would hope that as part of that overall PLN relationship, we could welcome in the PLN Institute as well. So, I love coffee. I've already had 3 coffees today. I'm feeling like the caffeine is pumping through my veins. So what we hope, using coffee as an analogy, is that the relationship that we have with Indonesia and with UNSW is already big and strong, and we hope that it will continue to be stronger and longer. So let's get to the core of the talk, topic 2, which is the topic that we agreed. And what I'm going to do here, as I said, is give you a bit of a snapshot of what happens at UNSW. This is an aerial shot of our campus. And I thought before I start to talk about our academic activities, I would simply talk about the sustainability of our campus itself. As was mentioned, I've been with UNSW for 30 years, and in that time I've seen the campus develop to a much higher quality campus physically, but also an increasingly green campus. So let me just take you through a couple of aspects of that. Before I talk about this particular building, I should mention that, for example, in terms of energy, that UNSW now either provides through some of its buildings its own energy, or indeed we only source our energy from green sources. So we have really distanced ourselves from using fossil fuel-based energy as part of our campus need. Now, this building in particular is really the highlight of the campus in terms of sustainability. It is very highly rated. Why? This is our Tyree Energy Technology building, and it's an appropriate highlight of sustainability because it houses one of our very important schools called Solar, Photovoltaic and Renewable Energy Engineering, and I'll come back to that school a little later. But this building is, again, one of the most sustainable. It has all sorts of attributes in its design that enable it to maintain very good temperature control with minimal carbon footprint. Why? Because on the roof, and you can see those waves, that waveform on the side view, but when we look at that from the top, we can see that the roof is covered with solar panels, and I'll talk more about those solar panels shortly. But there is also a regeneration system in the basement of the building that helps maintain a balance between cold and heat as we need through the seasons of the year. And again, I'll come back to that as a concept when I talk about my own case study. And then further, every time a new building is constructed on our campus, there is great thought given in the design to sustainability in terms of energy use in particular, but also water. And you can see mention of water here, that basically all of the water, the only water that is sourced from the pristine reticulated system is that which is drunk. All of the other water that's used on campus is either grey water, or indeed for watering the trees and grass and things like that, it's bore water. So we are trying to reduce our water usage footprint in terms of the use of drinkable water. And then finally, even in terms of besides water and energy, we also, despite being a metropolitan campus, it's just on the edge of the CBD, that we still have quite a green campus. We continue to green it more and more, but even there, in terms of the materials that come from the trees and even the grass when it's mowed, it's all composted on campus and used to fertilise and to mulch the existing trees and other plants on campus. So we have quite a wonderful kind of circular economy in terms of water, energy, and even vegetation. All right, so now let's turn to what we do in the academic sense. Just to give you a sense of how important sustainability is to UNSW, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I just wanted to, almost as just a graphic, just taking in the number of boxes there, the number of research centres that we have across the university that have some level of focus on sustainability. What's important about that is that it's not just about engineering or about science. Almost all of our faculties have some role, some function to play in many of these centres. So sustainability is not just about a technical solution, but about perspectives and inputs that come from a range of areas, from business to even arts and social sciences and the law. And you'll see this when we look at the two centres I'm going to focus on. And these are energy and water. So we have an energy institute and a global water institute. And I'm going to talk about some activities through the lens of those two institutes, respectively in relation to water and energy. Now, what I want to also do, besides promoting to that concept of a diversity of inputs to understand sustainability, whether we're talking water, energy, plant or animal life and so forth, is also a concept that I can borrow from my own area. When I look at food safety, we look at that holistically. We look at it from a range of perspectives, and we also look at it in this sense, from farm to fork. What does that mean? We look at it from the earliest stages of primary production, of say in my case chicken, all the way through processing to how do the consumers handle that product, the whole of the chain. And we need to think about sustainability and management of water and energy in the same way. That we need to think about everything from the earliest inputs to produce energy all the way through to what happens at the end with consumption, and also what happens to the materials that we use to produce energy. And so we might think in a similar way, what happens to water, for example. I'm not going to go through this graphic in detail. It's really just to, again, give you that idea that we need to be thinking about what happens to water from the moment that we harvest water, whether it's rainwater or river water. How do we process it? How do we use it? And what happens to the wastewater? How do we recycle it? And those concepts will come through when I look at my case study. Now, in terms of energy then, what are we working on? Well, I've highlighted in capital letters solar energy, and I'm going to come back to that because it's one of the most important facets of research and education at UNSW. We are world leaders in solar energy technology. But more recently, of course, as we see an interest globally in other forms of energy, similarly, the research activity has begun to accelerate at UNSW. So, for instance, that relates to hydrogen, both green hydrogen really from water, but also blue hydrogen in relation to ammonia-based energy. But also, interestingly, wanting to reduce the carbon footprint in relation to CO2 by looking at ways that we can convert, and this is kind of an interesting thing. If we think about what happens with fossil fuels, part of the output from fossil fuels, when we're, for instance, extracting it, is in the form of methane gas, and that gets burned, and of course it releases CO2. We're now kind of turning or reversing that process where we're looking at taking CO2, being able to look at cheap and easy ways to convert it to methane, using that methane as a fuel that can be burned, and of course we then have a cycle where we can continue to harvest back the CO2 and produce more methane. Okay? So again, the idea of constant recycling, and again I'll highlight that in a way through my case study. Of course, we all recognise that one of the most important forms of renewable energy that we are now making great use of globally is the sun. It's been there for billions of years, and only in the last, let's say around 50 years, have we started to be able to harvest that energy efficiently. And UNSW has been a leader in the research and development around photovoltaic engineering, and it really started with this guy here, Professor Martin Green. He's truly, if you like, a legend of engineering in this field. He has won many scientific awards. In fact, I think just trying to think whether it was actually the Queen or the King of England gave him an award as just another one in a long list for all of the contributions he's made to solar technology. And you can see him there symbolically holding a solar panel cell. Now, about 40 years ago or so, Martin and one of his first PhD student, Stuart Wenham, they started to develop solar cells as a very small research group. They then continued to build that research and partner with industry. And again, partnering with industry is really key. As well as starting to educate people around solar technology, started to develop courses. And today we see a large and thriving school at UNSW, again, solar photovoltaic and renewable energy engineering, that teaches programs in this area at undergraduate, postgraduate level, of course, as well as having a large number of PhD students continuing the research effort. Now, Martin and his team over time have continued to evolve solar cells to where we continue to break world records for the efficiency of the conversion of sunlight into electrical energy, particularly using a cheap base to those cells of silicon. When they first started, they were getting about 18% efficiency. We're now in the high 30%, and indeed for particular wavelengths of light, around 40% or more. More than double the efficiency. The other thing that's striking, again, not just in terms of lab-based research, but partnering with industry, is that, should I be worried? That we have partnered with industry, and around 90%, 90, not 19, 90% of solar panels in the world are based on UNSW technology. 90%. I have panels on the roof of my house in Sydney. They're made in China, but they're based on technology that was developed at UNSW. Further, and again, this is really important. This is one of the best facilities in the Southern Hemisphere, if not in the world. It's called the Solar Industrial Research Facility. What this enables us to do on our campus is go from the lab in terms of the research development of single wafers to actually testing them using industrial processes and starting to manufacture pilot panels so we can actually then be ready to hand technology off to industry. Yeah? Further then, and I mentioned Rose earlier as one of the great Indonesian exports to Australia, that Rose is also part of this energy story. Her background is in particle catalysis, but part of her very extensive and diverse research group is now investigating various approaches to the development of the hydrogen economy. In particular, using her expertise in catalysis to understand how we can very easily convert hydrogen both in relation to green hydrogen and blue hydrogen, using, for instance, solar energy to produce thermal energy that helps catalyse the transformation into hydrogen. So that's briefly the production of energy. What about storage? Well, again, UNSW has played an interesting part. Right now, one of the major research pushes, and again, I don't know how many people are aware here in Indonesia, but one of the, I guess, barriers to the full uptake of solar energy in Australia is not the solar cells. The solar cells, solar panels are now quite cheap. It's very economical. One of the barriers is storage. How can we actually store the energy? So great when the sun is shining, and Sydney's often lovely sunny days, especially this time of year, so we can produce a lot of energy, but what about at night? Yeah? The sun is not out. Where's the energy coming from? Back from the grid. Many of us would like to be off-grid, but the cost of battery technology at the moment is prohibitive. It's the barrier. So we're working generally on cheaper and higher energy density battery technology for greater storage at a lower price. And just one of the innovations that goes back many years is this, that we know that many of the batteries, everyone's got a phone, right? How many people have got a phone with them right now? At least one. Hands? Come on. You're telling me you don't have a phone? I can see it right there. No hand up, right? What powers that phone? A battery? What type of battery? I don't know. Okay, that's all right. Anyone? Anyone? Sorry? Lithium-ion battery, right? It's probably the most common type of battery beyond the old sort of acid alkaline kind of batteries that we use in old devices, right? But lithium-ion batteries, certainly at commercial or industrial scale, or even for a domestic operation like a house, expensive. Some years ago, this professor, Maria Skilis-Kazakis, developed a technology called the vanadium battery. great technology. For many years, it was kind of ignored. But now there are a number of companies around the world that are picking up on that technology, and it may be one of the next generation type of batteries that we see becoming that storage solution for solar energy. Of course, then, beyond the storage, we're also looking at distribution. Every country must have some form of grid to get power from its generation out to its people. And of course, the grid in more traditional settings is a massive grid. I'm sure that's true here in Indonesia, and of course in a country like Australia, that's been true. And in Australia it's problematic because we're a very large continent where the population is kind of spread largely around the coastline and particularly in the cities, but we also have an increasing number of people living in regional and remote Australia, and we have to get power to them. And supplying them from a more centralised grid is really difficult. And so, of course, we are sort of thinking about alternatives such as local grids, microgrids and so forth, particularly with solar energy. And again, if we have the battery solutions, then in some of those remote communities, we're going to see more and more people going off-grid, that they will simply have a personal power supply at their house or their farm. I'm the same. I have a house in Sydney. I'm also lucky enough to have a farm that's in the bush, and I have solar energy, but it would be great if I could be off-grid.
You have so many friends today, not only human but also cats.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
I don't mind cats, but I'm more of a dog person. Yeah. All right, so in terms of distribution, basically what we're starting to do, along with actually the production and storage of energy, is trying to understand how grids function. And that's really in two ways. And again, this is where perspective comes in. One is to understand what are the fluctuations in power needs based on what will become an increasingly diverse and variable sourcing of energy using multiple sources. So again, as we move away from fossil fuels, so we've seen, for example, that we are starting to shut down coal-fired power stations. Some of those have transitioned to the use of gas, but increasingly we're going to see a mix of certainly solar power, but also wind energy and perhaps other sources, including potentially, say, geothermal or wave-generated energy. How do they fit into the grid and how do they get modelled? How do they work? And alongside that, working with consumers, so the personal side of things, what are people's usages? What data can we gather and analyse to understand the needs of people, the consumers of that power, and how does that align with the generation of power using multiple renewable sources versus the traditional centralised production with fossil fuels and a centralised grid. And then finally, remember that idea of farm to fork, from, if you like, cradle to grave. We start, how do we get the energy, how do we store the energy, what happens at the end with the materials? And again, this is something we're starting to focus on. That's a big question for people who are sceptical about the sustainability of renewable energy. It's how is it generated? So for instance, what happens with the solar panels when they've reached the end of their usable life? Do we just throw them into landfill? So we have to start looking at the component materials and how we can reutilise those. This just gives, I'm not going to go through this in detail again, but just really a bit of an idea on what's in there and how potentially it might be reused or repurposed. More broadly in that area, in terms of all kinds of waste materials, is another of our very successful professors, Veena Sehajwalla. She's a materials scientist by background. She started looking into recycling some years ago and started that mission by looking at the incorporation of used tyres, rubber tyres, to provide carbon into steel production rather than using pristine steel, pristine carbon sources in steel making. And that's been extremely successful, where she's worked with our major steel producer, and that technology has simply been exported to many countries in the world. And she's continued then to work on how we can recycle components of various of our modern technologies, including when we move on to the next phone. What do you do with your iPhone, like me? What do you do with your iPhone 6 when you then suddenly buy an iPhone 14? What happens to it? Do you just throw it away? Do you put it in a landfill? Or do you harvest back some of the precious materials that are used in that phone? That's VENA's mission, and we have a centre called the Smart Centre, which is all about recycling electronic waste in particular. Okay, so that's a snapshot of energy. What about water? Again, as I mentioned, we have the UNSW Global Water Institute. And again, what this slide represents is a number of centres that have come together. But what I want you to note here are the number of faculties that are involved. Right? It's not just about science and engineering. It's not just about the technology or the science and technology. There are aspects of law. Interestingly, the business isn't mentioned there, but there are economic considerations. Art, design and architecture in terms of smart cities, energy efficient cities and so forth. Even medicine in terms of population health and engaging in what role does energy play in being able to maintain health in populations that come from a low socio-economic background and typically in regional and remote areas. For those of us that live in cities, it's easy. But I've got to say, from personal experience, when I look at access to energy, water, telecommunications between my house in Sydney and my farm in remote New South Wales, the contrast is really stark, really different. It's far easier to be part of a large city. You get the services easily, but as soon as you start to move into rural settings, those services become difficult to access. So if you then look at this list in terms of what that centre does, its overarching is about water governance security. We also look, particularly in Australia, because of the importance of our coastline, not just at terrestrial water like the rivers and other waterways, but also the coastline. And then finally, something that has global reach where we're looking at safe water, and our university is very heavily focused on global impact, giving back, that we would love to see access and equity for all to safe drinking water. And I've been coming to Indonesia, I don't know, for well over a decade, and I still look at the fact that I can't, even staying in a good hotel, for example, I can't turn on the tap and take a glass of water and drink it, which is something in Australia that we take for granted, that we have a safe water supply. And so wouldn't it be wonderful if everyone, everywhere, could have that same safe water supply? So in terms of capabilities, I'm not going to go through this, I'm just going to pick a few examples, but basically we cover a whole range of areas of research and development and teaching across water, and that ranges from the technologies, for instance, to process water, all the way through to governance at state and national levels. And I'll just give you a few examples of this. So in terms of inputs, again, remember that idea of where does water come from? And we might think in a number of countries that in Australia, for instance, a lot of our water starts as rainfall that is gathered in dams, and I'll come back to that. So we're lucky in the sense that most of our water currently is accessed via rainwater, either by companies that then treat that water from the dams and provide it to us, say in the cities, or indeed, as I find at my farm, that I've got tanks and I collect the rainwater off the roof, and because it's in a rural area without pollution, I can essentially consume that water directly. Yeah? But in a number of countries, and actually even in Sydney now, we have a desalination plant. So at times when rainfall is low, because of climate change, we're actually taking seawater, removing salt and providing a feed of that desalinated water into Sydney's water supply. Now this fellow, Richard Kingsford, he is the king of sort of governance around natural waterways in Australia. He's a biologist. Now what he's worked on are really two things. One is to understand the impact of water harvesting from our river system on the flora and fauna, the plants and animals of Australia around those waterways. If we take water from the rivers, how does that impact the natural ecology? And then further still, because of the fact that a number of rivers in Australia actually flow inland rather than to the coast, and people, farmers, extract water from the river, what is the governance around that? How much water can farmers actually harvest from the rivers before we start harming the flora and fauna that those rivers would also serve? Do we put nature first, or do we put humans and the economy first? And there's got to be some kind of balance there. So we have involvement. I should mention, by the way, the fellow on this end, Professor Greg Leslie, is the director of the Global Water Institute. I mentioned the coastline. We also have a number of projects that relate to coastal ecosystems. I mentioned desalination. One of the projects, for instance, that we did, researchers at UNSW did, was to actually look at the impact of desalination. What happens to the heavily salted waste stream from providing water back into Sydney? What happens to that highly salty water that's released from that process? And interestingly, the dilution into the ocean is very quick. The salt actually has very little impact. What does seem to have an impact on the marine fauna is actually simply the pumping of that water into the local environment. But it's very disruptive. The physical pumping of that salty water, very disruptive to the marine fauna. So we're having to look at how do we ameliorate that? How do we mitigate that so that we don't see that problem with impact on the fauna? Along with that, of course, and because of the increasing number of extreme weather events, we're also concerned about what's happening to our coastline. Again, remember that many people live on the coast. Some people very close, right on the edge of the coast. What happens, for instance, when we have massive storms and very high tides, and those are actually washing away at our beaches and indeed undermining houses so that they're falling into the ocean? It's a major concern in Australia. And so we actually have a wonderful project that is in part academically driven, but actually a really good example of citizen science, where there are a number of sites around the Australian coastline. And indeed this project, I don't know whether they have sites in Indonesia, but this project has actually taken off globally, where people are establishing these kind of stations, and anyone can take their mobile phone, take a photo from that station, so it's always from the same position, and using an app they can transfer that phone to a database at UNSW, at our Water Research Laboratory. And so over time, through citizen science, we can actually come to understand changes in different parts of our coastline, whether they're slow or whether they're significant. And further still then, with our Water Research Laboratory, we can investigate various physical attributes of our water system. Particularly, for example, we can construct small models of the dams that serve as our catchments to provide water into different cities, for example. We can model those looking at flows, how they change depending on height and so on and so forth. So we can provide expert advice to government, state and federal, in terms of how we might change, for instance, how we might build higher on a particular dam so that we can catch more water, but we can also mitigate floods. And I've got to say, in Australia, we're the second driest continent on the planet after Antarctica. So water is very precious, and the problem at the moment is it tends to be either feast or famine. That sometimes we don't have enough water, and the dam that supplies Sydney at one point was critically low, and again that's when the desalination plant was built. But also at other times there can be so much rainfall that we're in danger of breaking the wall of some of our major dams, and we have to release water and actually flood certain communities simply so that we don't have catastrophic flooding events. That's a problem. And again, I think right here in Indonesia you understand, particularly in Jakarta, right? The impact of water. My understanding is that Jakarta is slowly but surely sinking, and of course we know that government is moving to Borneo, well, has already started that process. So again, we also look at monitoring our catchment dams in various ways for water quality, including, for instance, in my area, the fact that at times, under certain conditions, if we have too many nutrients, we get blue-green algae growing. They produce toxins and they can enter the water supply, and then we have a public health event. So we have to look at the inputs in a whole range of ways to ensure a safe and secure water supply. In terms of production, well, I've already touched on this. This is another one of our professors. He's kind of retired, not retired, David Waite, who for many years has worked on water supply. Here he is, just a stock photo, but in relation to the implementation of the desalination plant in Sydney. But further still, and I touched on UNSW's desire to show global impact, giving things back. We also have work on humanitarian engineering. So, for example, if I go to this side first, recently we've signed an agreement with the Fiji government and with the University of the South Pacific to work on water as a critical issue in a number of South Pacific nations, let me say, for example, the Solomon Islands. But we actually have quite a global reach. Recently, in November last year, I, along with the fellow in the pink shirt, Andrew Danzy, we have a project in collaboration with a university partner in northern Uganda to look at very simple systems, sort of, if you like, micro systems based on traditional city-based water purification or treatment processes. This is an example of a micro system installed at one of the local schools so that the students actually have a safe system of water supply for drinking. Yeah? And that's been implemented, I think, now in 7 schools in this city of Gulu in northern Uganda, and they're looking at expanding this, and we work collaboratively with an organisation called the African STEM Education Initiative to provide those systems. And of course then we have outputs, and of course again this comes back to that whole of cycle. We know where water can come from, we know how to treat it, what happens to the waste water, and of course we can talk about just general waste, so for example the treatment of human waste, sewage, but also we have specialist projects, for example looking at water that comes from the mining industry, which can present particular problems in terms of its chemical composition and how do we remove those impurities to return that water to the environment in a safe and proper way. An important part of that, of course, is developing the technology for water treatment. This is just, it's all in a black box here, but basically membrane technology. And what I wanted to point to again in terms of one of UNSW's major activities, I've already mentioned the solar work of Martin Green, the work on particle catalysis of Rosa Maal, and in this example, really a whole centre started out with a professor called Tony Fain many years ago to really look at the use of membrane technology in all its applications across water and indeed even the agri-food industry. And that centre is still running, and it's something like 50 years old. Okay. That's that snapshot of water and energy at UNSW. And again, I could talk about a whole range of other examples. And I'd encourage you, if you're interested in what's going on in that space at UNSW, go and have a look at our website. Last part, what I want to do is have a look at this case study. And hopefully this will bring home in a very specific way some of the concepts that I've already talked about. I have worked with the poultry industry basically since I finished my PhD. In my PhD I worked on milk and with goats, and my first job before becoming an academic was actually to work in the egg industry. And I've continued to work with chicken meat and eggs for now 35 years or so. And you can see just how passionate I am. You know, it looks like I've grown a comb. So in Australia, and I know it's true in Indonesia that chicken is fairly popular, but interestingly here, chicken consumption per capita, per person, is actually much, much lower than Australia. In Australia we consume a lot of chicken, and of course people might know that with Australia, traditionally, red meats, beef and lamb in particular, have been staples of the Australian diet. And in fact, many years ago, chicken was expensive. Chicken was the Sunday roast. You might eat it once a week or once a fortnight. Now people eat chicken several times a week as the protein source in their diet. So what we've seen over time is that, relatively speaking, the consumption of different red meats has declined while the consumption of chicken meat has increased steadily. So it is the most popular meat today in Australia. The blue one? Oh,
The blue line.
yeah, I'm not sure why that's on
I
there.
think it's like maybe fish.
Yeah. I don't know. That's a good question. Kangaroo is lovely, I have to say. You know, I think we're the only country in the world that eats both the animals on its coat of arms.
It's a beef
Do you know what the other one is? Kangaroo is one. Do you know what the other one is?
koala.
Koala. Oh, no. They're far too cute to eat a koala. Anyone? It's a bird. Starts with E. Elephant? Elephant? I don't know that an elephant is a bird. I think it's a different species, different beast. Anyone? It's called the emu.
Eagle.
It's like an ostrich, like an Australian ostrich. Okay? Yeah. We eat both of them. Yeah. Both are yummy. Especially kangaroo. Very lean meat, very tasty. Yeah. You should try it sometime. All right. Enough of that. So you can see here, and I'll just highlight in this graph, there's Australia, 4th in the world for per capita consumption of chicken. There's Indonesia, much further down the list. So again, here you tend to have other protein sources. I'll go back to what we said earlier about soybeans, right? Tofu, tempeh, yeah? Maybe soybeans just as whole beans, yeah? But chicken is still maybe one of the most common meat proteins that is consumed here. Change. Yeah, so basically we can see what's happened to chicken production in terms of the number of chickens processed and then the chicken meat produced. It has climbed very steadily in the last 50 years. I mean, it was really very low. Look at where it is now. Now in the industry, I'm not going to say too much about this slide, simply to say that the industry is dominated in Australia by 2 major companies. There are a few smaller ones. And basically what I wanted to point to here is the fact that the industry is highly integrated. What does that mean? They breed their own chickens, they make their own feed, they grow the chickens, they slaughter, process the chickens, and the chickens and other products go into the marketplace. They sort of do everything themselves. Now, in terms of the topic, what are environmental considerations? What are sustainability issues around this industry? Again, remembering that it's an important industry and it's growing all the time. These are those, and at the top, in capital letters, deliberately, water. I'm going to come back to that, but also to an extent energy, and then we have to think about the other inputs. And in terms of environment and sustainability, things that people may not think about are these ones. Make sure I hit the right button here. If I hit the right button, can I get that to come up? Whoops. The waste, and chickens produce a lot of waste from the feed they eat, but also even odour and noise, smell pollution, noise pollution. As our population has expanded in cities, they've grown out towards where chickens were being produced because people don't like the smell or the noise, and chicken production has had to move to more regional areas, and that actually is one of the important issues. I'll come back to that shortly. Now, in terms of some of the waste, I'm going to deal with these ones quickly, that with the waste management, the industry has innovated. Right? They've actually made, I don't know whether you have a saying like it here, but often we talk about making lemonade out of lemons. Yeah? When we've got a problem, we try and do something with it. You don't know that? Oh, time-wise? Oh, that's all right. I'll keep going. I'll try and get through this quickly. Yeah. So a number of companies buy that, make it into fertiliser that people buy for their gardens and things like that, and they can actually make quite a lot of money, profit, off the back of that waste material. Even some of the waste, when you take a chicken, you've got all sorts of stuff that comes from the inside. That's all collected and it goes into protein recovery. So we can actually make, for instance, that can go into things like pet food. So again, we're trying to ensure that we're minimising waste and maximising recovery, if you like, of some of those waste feed streams. Now, in terms of chicken production, it used to be actually concentrated even in some of the cities themselves, like Sydney, but it's continued to move. It's still largely around the coastline, but in more provincial areas. And so we can just see some of the concentrations, not within the cities, but around them, so that we can actually provide the chicken logistically to the major markets, but it's still in more regional, rural areas. Now, why is that important? Because when we actually overlay those production areas with a map of what's happening with rainfall, what we find is rainfall is decreasing in all of those areas. So access to water for that industry is decreasing, and it means that because water is more scarce, it becomes more expensive. And on the other side of that, because the industry uses a lot of water, the treatment of wastewater is also becoming more expensive.
Maybe
Now-
5 more minutes.
Sorry?
5 more minutes.
Oh, I'll
It's
try and whip
okay?
through this really quickly. Let me go past this. This is a bit funny. So very quickly, in terms of the poultry abattoir,
Sorry.
what are the inputs and outputs? Oh, that's all right. We can eat into Q&A time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or you can tell me when to shut up. I'll take it from the audience, Yeah. So we've got these inputs, these outputs. And of course, basically, as we increase the need to produce more chickens, right? Remember, the industry is growing. Well, of course, we have more inputs and more outputs. And if we think about waste in general, the processed birds, of course, are the product, but waste, the amount of carbon dioxide being produced directly and indirectly, as well as the wastewater, that's increasing. And we've got that increasing problem to deal with. That's some figures about it, but we can skip past that in terms of the numbers. So what are we aiming to do? What did we aim to do with this project? Well, was to try and reduce the need to use potable drinking water. Remember, that should be used for the most sensitive application, which is humans drinking water. But also then, can we also reduce the amount of wastewater, particularly wastewater that is released to the environment? We didn't really initially focus on energy, directly and indirectly, but mainly water, but as you'll see, we come back to energy. Now, one company in Australia, and remember I said there's 2 major producers around the country, one, their solution was to start to look at what we call end-of-pipe treatment. That means taking the water that collects from all of the process of making the chickens, if you will, and then treating it at the end as it exits the processing plant, releasing concentrated wastewater and potentially feeding that water back into their processing plant. So what it does, it actually does reduce the amount of wastewater, but what was seen was that it increases the amount of power that was needed to drive that process. Our solution was really to look at an inline processing of wastewater, using membrane technology close to key operations within the poultry process, which meant we were actually bringing water back into the processing plant and only releasing a relatively small amount of concentrated wastewater. I'm going to skip past these. I've already commented on the fact that basically what these next couple of slides show is really the price of water treatment and energy going in. And it does vary from state to state. But even though it seems relatively cheap, when these industries are using thousands and thousands of litres a day, it becomes really quite an expensive part of their operation. So basically, we started to look at water and energy recovery, and our option was this idea of centralised membrane treatment. So let me keep moving ahead. In terms of 2 parts of the operation, those that actually use the most water, there are 2. One is called the scald tank, which is where the chickens are kind of put into a hot bath. It helps release the feathers so they can be removed from the chicken. The other is what we call the spin chiller. It's at the end of the process where chickens are mixed with cold, refrigerated, chlorinated water to bring the temperature of the carcass down, so it maintains the quality of that chicken better. So what we were looking to do was put membrane treatment modules right beside those 2 operations and be able to look at cycling the water back in. I'm going to skip past that. The solution that we looked at, because of their physical properties, were what we call aluminium oxide cartridge membranes. To understand whether this was feasible or not, and again, this is an important consideration for you going into engineering, you might think about a technological solution to a problem, but can it actually be commercialised? Can you actually put it into industry? So we need to understand the factors that might influence the ability of industry to actually implement what we could do, say, in the lab. So we undertook a triple bottom line analysis, and basically what this showed was that water treatment and recovery was feasible, but only marginally in terms of its economics. But if we could look at energy recovery, that would certainly make this a feasible proposal. And so we had to look at both water and energy recovery together, and that's why the operations have to be right at the point of collection of the water from those two units, right? The scald tank and the spin chiller. In terms of water regulations, again, I'll skip past this, but basically the summary of these few slides is the fact that if water can be brought to a level of quality that is fit for purpose, so again, that we can actually use it within a process, then if we can treat the water at that point, that water can be used by industry in terms of commercial food products. So what we call fit for purpose use. In terms of what we had to do for those to meet those characteristics to make it fit for purpose, we had to look at various analyses that are important to the regulations. And basically, we then looked at a pilot scale. We did some work in the lab, but then we actually built a rig where we could pilot this process in industry, in the commercial industry setting. Basically, I'm going to go past that. But what we saw was that we can quite easily, produce water that is fit for purpose. And again, I'll just skip past these quickly. You can see where the red lines indicate the limits that are required by regulations, and we can see that for these different parameters that we're able to meet them very, very well. So what it means is that generally we know that this process will work, that it will deliver water that is suitable to put back into the process. Now, let me go quickly to these. We then started to model what happens with the water treatment in relation to some of those parameters, especially turbidity, and the connection being between turbidity, dirt if you like, and this microorganism, which is an important indicator of water quality. And basically, after modelling that, we then started to fit experimental data to it, and we could see that generally that the experimental data from sampling of the water over time met the theoretical model, but there were some interesting changes, and this depended on, for instance, the size of bird and how dirty the birds are coming into the process. So at times when they were larger and dirtier, it's a bit of a problem, but when they're smaller and cleaner, we can actually get a very high quality water coming back out of the system. And then at times when the operation needs to be shut down or stopped, for instance, there's no birds flowing in but water continues to flow in and dilute, then we get this kind of negative gradient to the fit. Skip past that one. We also saw there was, as I mentioned before, a relationship between turbidity, the dirt if you like coming off the birds, and this organism called E. coli, which is an indicator of the potential presence of pathogens. Skip past that one. So, feasible for water. Energy, and again I won't explain this, but simply to say that again by having the membrane filtration system very close to either the scald tank or the spin chiller, we can recover energy in the form of heat, or indeed the energy in the form of refrigerated water. We can put that back into the process and capture that energy back. So actually we're not only recovering then water, but also energy. Life cycle analysis, let me skip past this fairly quickly. Basically, we've then undertaken, after doing that experiment in the plant, we've kind of aligned the triple bottom line analysis with experimental data and ultimately the life cycle analysis. That is, how feasible is it to actually operate this ongoing in commercial poultry processing production in terms of the costs associated with it. Everything from the energy that we need to run it to the membrane cartridges themselves. And I'm going to just skip to this and think about the footprint, and the answer is very, very good. Basically what we find with this is we greatly reduce the environmental impact through the carbon footprint by using the membrane filtration system compared to both end-of-pipe standard water treatment and the industry competitor, which is called the advanced wastewater treatment system. Again, end-of-pipe treatment using membranes. And just quickly, this shows you the change in the water. So that's the input from the spin chiller. It still looks pretty dirty. There's still a lot of organic matter in there. But look at the quality of that water. If you actually look at it without the photo, for real, that water is very, very high quality. You might even think you could drink it. I don't know that I would drink it. But again, it's fit for the purpose to put it back into processing. So conclusions, basically, to summarise this slide maybe in a line, is the fact that we know now that if we implement this, and indeed one of the major producers in Australia is actually building a full-size rig with this membrane filtration at one of their largest processing plants to full commercial implementation, because we know that we can recover about 80% of water plus and about 50% of energy. So that bottom line means that we are greatly reducing the carbon footprint using this technology. So with that, I'll finish up and we'll just take questions in a moment. If you have any interest in contacting me, that's the email address. I'm on Twitter and on LinkedIn and on Instagram and on Facebook. I didn't list the other two, but yeah.
YouTube.
All right. And you can Google me.
No, YouTube.
All right. So thank you very much, Terima kasih banyak for your attention, and I'll be happy now to take questions.
Thank you, Associate Professor Julian Cox. Please come to the stage and
Sure.
let's have a take
Do
a
I,
break.
need, do I need to sit down?
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
you're
of
going to?
course.
Oh, you're going to quiz
This is
me?
your drink.
Oh, it's thirsty work there.
Yeah, so very interesting, and you have so many long experiences in many things and many fields. I guess like from the collaboration and then about energy, about water, and I bet that there are already so many questions in their mind because we have so many participants. You can see there are additional chair, and also we have some participants too online. Yeah, about like 40 participants who also join online. And yeah, I'm definitely agree with you that for solving an environmental issue, water issues cannot be solved by like one institution or engineering only, but also there's like your three circles. There are also social and then environmental thing, economic, maybe cultural also influence about the how to solve the environmental issues, and also energy.
Agreed.
Yeah. So also sometimes I confused about how should I dispose my like electronic trash, like computer, old TV, something, and mostly we just dump it in our storage room, and we don't know what to do. And yeah, that's very nice that you can reuse and reuse the part. What is it? The element like glass, aluminum, and plastic to use the solar, right? And actually, in the building, we also have solar panels to support some of the electricity in this building. Maybe Mr. Pawan or some lecturer here also can explain more about the solar system in our building. And we actually here have lecturers, also students, and ITPLN leaders. And I believe that now we have to come to the Q&A session. So maybe I will open like 2 sessions, but not too long because we have a limited time. And actually we wish to give you more time because it's very interesting, and I also would like to hear more about your explanation and presentation. But now for the first session, I invite from the floor 3 first question. Please raise your hands. Okay, 1 in the back, 2, 3. Okay, 1, 2, 3 first. And after this, maybe if somebody asks me online, you can chat on the chat box on Zoom. so I can read the, yeah. Okay, start from, yeah,
back there.
lady with the
And here.
black hijab. Students.
Great.
Hello, my name is Rady. I'm from Environmental Engineering major. As I can see, UNSW campus has great management, environment, even they care about the water process treatment. Do you have any advice for our management campus compared to yours? And also, do you have any trick or method for us Indonesian students to apply to UNSW scholarship? Thank you.
Oh, okay, so two parts. The technical one. Again, I think it was summarised a little bit by our moderator. I guess I tried to stress that when we're working in science and technology, we can often come up with, again, a technological solution. We can come up with something in the lab, but we really have to consider other factors, including the human factor and the impact on humans, on us. So as mentioned, particularly with the triple bottom line analysis, what are the social and economic impacts? What do they have? And I guess not thinking about just my case study, but if we think about the energy transition that we're seeing in Australia, and you're going to face the same thing here in Indonesia, what happens as we move away from fossil fuels? Yeah? So we can look at the positives in terms of, for instance, reducing the amount of carbon dioxide and other gases that are being released, so we can reduce greenhouse gases. Fantastic. But what happens to the people who are involved in those industries? From the mining of those resources, the harvesting, say coal, oil, gas, and then also the people who are involved in those energy generation industries, how do they transition to maybe be part of renewable energy generation? Or indeed, do they have to find alternatives, and can they find employment? So it's a serious question. We have to think about those human factors. So again, what I would encourage you with your first question is, don't just again think about what is the scientific or technological solution, but what is a solution that can be managed, that can work within society as a whole. Yeah. Second question, in terms of scholarships, it depends on what level you're studying at, so whether it's undergraduate, postgraduate or higher degree research. So for UNSW, with our scholarship money, we tend to, because we're research intensive, we tend to apply most of our money in the scholarship area to PhD students, to research, but we do have some scholarships that are available to Indonesia specifically. You can certainly talk to Stefan, who's here, or our Indonesia office, about scholarships that are on offer. But also, of course, at master's level, and particularly if you're working in government, things like LPDP. We see a number of students coming for masters or PhD that are funded by LPDP as a mechanism. So there is money from both sides to get students there, particularly for postgraduate coursework study, masters or PhD. And again, Stefan or the Indonesia team can help with more information. Great.
Okay, second
I think
question
this
from
fellow over
this-
here, yeah.
Thank you. My name is Rizal from Informatics Engineering. And thank you, sir, for coming to Institute of Technology of ITPLN. And today I want to ask a question. So as we all know, the development of nuclear power generators is currently underway. And this nuclear power is one of the renewable energy sources alongside wind and also solar energy. But this thorium-based power has high power, so much so that these nuclear power generators can, one nuclear power generator can replace lots of solar panel power generators. However, it also has disadvantages, such as the expensive cost to build one generator of nuclear plant, and also there are maybe some harmful effects also to the environmental aspect. So therefore, is it effective to use nuclear plants in city while using solar panels in remote areas. I would like to hear your opinions, dear Professor. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Again, it's a complex question. So I know in Australia there are ongoing discussions about the use of nuclear energy as part of the mix. Yeah. Clearly, one of the factors is the resistance to the implementation of nuclear energy. So in Australia, there's a lot of public resistance to it. I mean, we've got resistance in regional remote areas to wind farms, let alone the use of nuclear plants. So at the moment in Australia, we only have one small nuclear plant, and it's really dedicated to the production of nuclear isotopes for medical applications. There is no power generation. I could say that Australia probably would like to perhaps see more nuclear energy being used globally, because we have some of the largest uranium reserves in the world. So we do have uranium mines, but again, the appetite for that product, even domestically, is low. Yeah. So it would be a wonderful export industry for Australia. I think in particular, your question about nuclear reactors in major centres would absolutely be resisted by the public. Yeah. In Australia, people would say the phrase, "not in my backyard." Where's it going to be built? If it's built over the other side of Sydney, I don't care. If it's in my suburb, I care a lot. Yeah. Even though we know, despite Chernobyl and Fukushima, that really nuclear energy is considered, on the whole, safe technology. Yeah, there's still a lot of resistance, and some of those things, like the disasters we've seen in Russia and Japan, are still in the public mind. So there's still resistance. I think the solution then, in terms of, you mentioned then, could you have solar in remote areas? Absolutely. So again, what we're starting to see is even, again, off-grid for a number of farmers, where they're able to, as a business, write off the cost of the battery technology, which is still a really expensive part. Some people are implementing personal wind turbines, not the huge turbines that are then becoming part of the feed to the grid, but personal turbines that will actually supplement their energy needs through battery storage when solar power is reduced through, cloudy days or indeed at night. Yeah. So I think we're going to see more and more renewable energy in regional and remote areas, but I don't think we're going to see, certainly in Australia, the implementation of nuclear energy in the urban centres, because I think there's too much public resistance.
The next will
There's someone
be
over there.
someone on the right side. Is it? Yeah, please.
Oh, I should mention, just while the microphone's heading over, please, that we actually, because there is still interest, so we actually do have a program in nuclear engineering at UNSW. It's one of our more specialty, newer programs, but we recognise there is a need to educate people in that direction for the future, so we actually teach in that area as well.
Excuse me, my name is Wisnuajan Pratama. I'm from Geography. So, Professor, how potable are the wastewater from poultry after being filtered using membrane filtration technology for reuse on poultry again? Will it impact the quality of chicken that are being produced from there? And is it possible to use that filtration technology to produce sustainable potable water for human cheaply? Thank you so much.
Okay. I'll take the last bit first. So, potable water, no. It's not considered to be of a quality without treatment. Probably if we were to take that water, because it meets other requirements, if we were to take that water and chlorinate it, it probably would be potable. But that's not the intention. The intention is to keep that water really circulating within the plant. So again, we're reducing the amount of water that we have to feed into the operation, and also by harvesting it close to, again, either the scald tank or the spin chiller, that we capture some of that energy. Obviously, over time, we're going to lose a little bit of energy each time, but it still means that we're still ahead of having to put energy in every time through fresh fruit. So, for instance, with the scald tank, if we take cold water, let's say out of the tap, let's say it's about 20 degrees, and we have to bring it up to 55, 60 degrees Celsius, that's a lot of energy. But if we can capture that water and put it back in, cleaned up, fit for purpose, and that water is still at, let's say, 50 degrees or 45 degrees, we don't have to heat it very much. Now, again, what we're talking about is putting that water back into the same process. So that school tank, if you were to look into that school tank, it's extremely dirty. We're feeding in water that's actually really quite clean, so there's no problem. Similarly, at the spin chiller, the water is relatively clean, despite what you saw in the image. It's quite low in organisms because the water is chlorinated, it's cold. Most of what you see as that turbidity is basically fat and other organic matter. It's not really dirt, it's not really bad bacteria or anything. So that's relatively clean, if I can say that. And so the water is going into the same process. And again, it's of higher quality, it's not potable, but it's of higher quality than the water that's actually circulating in those operations. So it certainly suits that use. And again, as I said, the company, one of the largest producers in Australia, after continuing to investigate the work done by a PhD student here, they are now implementing that at one of their major processing plants. Yeah. So again, almost back to the first question, it's not technology that a lot of research that we might do is kind of curiosity driven. This was very practical, and we can actually see commercial application. Yeah. Is that okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Now for the second session for Q&A, there are one question from the online from the Zoom, so I will read it for you. So, how can the principle of circular economy be applied in industries to reduce waste and optimize the use of energy and water resources?
Yeah, it's an excellent
From
question.
Grimaldi.
Yeah. Well, it's hello. It's a very, very big question. But hopefully, I mean, what you've seen through, I guess, the broad description of UNSW as well as the case study, that indeed that's what we're seeing. That we increasingly need to look, I think the water and energy reuse highlights that indeed it is circular. So what we're trying to do is reduce the amount of clean water inputs and also reduce the amount of dirty water outputs. Because, again, pristine water, say from rainfall, it's less and less. In general in Australia, and particularly in the areas where we're producing not just chicken, but food in general. So we have to look at water recycling. It's not quite as resisted as nuclear energy, but a lot of people are still reluctant to use recycled water. So there was one of the towns in Australia called Toowoomba. They actually refused to have a recycled water plant feeding water back into their reticulated water system for consumption. And that's a shame, because if we look around the world, I'm not sure about here, but Singapore is a really good example. Most of the water they drink is recycled water. If we look at Europe, some people say that by the time water gets to down some of the river systems, that water has been reused up to 7 times. So in some societies, we live with recycled water as the norm. Yeah, there is a sort of a circular economy around water. And here again, the same with energy. And if you look at the work with Veena Sehajwalla around electronic goods, again, we're trying to increase the circular economy there. Can we take, in particular, not just the plastics, not just the cheaper materials, but in particular in some of these modern devices, it's the rare earth metals, the other elements that are extremely expensive and scarce, that we need to be harvesting back and putting back into technology again and again. You know, we have limited resources on the planet, and we already know that, you know, to harvest, I mean, people are estimating that if we continue to build lithium-ion batteries, that we don't have enough lithium on the planet to sustain that industry. So we have to be looking at recycling batteries if we're using lithium, and we need to look at other sources. For instance, as I mentioned, the vanadium battery. But even vanadium is a relatively rare metal to be able to use. So again, we can't afford to be using pristine, new material all the time. We have to be
Yeah.
recycling it.
Okay, thank you. I hope it's answered your question. And two last question, maybe before we close the session from the floor. Any more question? Please raise your hand. And actually, this another question from online. Can public-private sector collaboration be enhanced to promote investment in sustainable energy and water infrastructure project?
Well, the short answer to that is a very definite yes. If I just take the example of solar technology, I mean, it's the perfect example from UNSW, certainly. That, you know, we started out with what was a research activity, you know, Martin and Stuart working in their very small lab in a very poor building at UNSW many years ago to work on silicon wafer technology, and look at where we are now. They've taken their technology, they've innovated, they've done the technology transfer to industry. I mean, some of the richest people on the planet now are in China because they're graduates of UNSW, they got their PhD, they went back, set up solar panel companies and those technologies. So again, if I just mention my own house, I have what are called Trina panels. They're made in China using UNSW technology that's been licensed to them, and now I'm using that to generate energy at my house. And as I mentioned earlier, 90% of solar panels in the world are based on UNSW technology. So if we're talking about academia or, you know, public-private relationships, I can't necessarily think of a better example. Yeah? Yeah, 90%.
Yeah, another question? Last one, maybe?
One more?
Or maybe, if not, then I will take the question.
Sure.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, from your picture, maybe, is that, like, how many % of the possibility from the maybe business or institution or anything in Australia have responsibility to have recycle on responsibility for their recycle waste and the energy, like, you know, using solar panel maybe to save the energy. Is that any regulation, and is there any punishment from the government if they don't do the recycling and also use the like renewable energy or something like
Yeah.
that? Thank you.
Yeah, again, a great question. I would say in Australia, and again, we've got to look at, you know, whether an economy is sufficiently developed to be able to do some of these things, right? Do they have the legislation? Do they have the infrastructure? In Australia, I guess many of the companies are recognising that brand is really important to them, and increasingly part of their brand is around their environmental credentials. So, for example, can they work to national or indeed international standards around environmental management? And if they can, and they can prove that they can put a nice big tick on their advertising to say, we're meeting this particular ISO standard for environmental management, as an example. Yeah. Environmental management also becomes part of their overall corporate social responsibility. So many companies, again, in the broader sense, are looking at various aspects of how they can comply with what society expects, whether it's environmental concern, whether it's giving back in terms of their contributions to charities, to support less developed communities. So, for instance, in Australia, I can think of one company in the IT space that spends a lot of time working with underprivileged communities, in particular First Nations people in Australia. One could say, is that sort of cynical? Is that really just because they want to protect their brand? Or are they genuinely interested? I would say, having worked with them, that it's genuine. So I think environment is just one part of it, and we're going to see an increasing expectation. You know, one thing I can think about in that regard, even from my own viewpoint in the food area, tuna, dolphin safe tuna, right? A lot of people look for the little symbol on the side of the can of tuna. Is it dolphin safe? People love dolphins. They want dolphins to be safe. They won't buy tuna unless it says dolphin safe, yeah? So again, I think we're going to see that consumers, I don't know how all of you feel. You know, I've got a certain amount of environmental and social conscious, and I think what we find among the youth, I don't know how true it is, you could maybe tell me, that you're more and more aware of some of these issues and they're part of your concern about what you're consuming, whether it's energy or food. Yeah? Maybe not, because in some cases, again, in less privileged communities, people just see, I have the need to eat. In Australia, where you have discretion, we have wealth and discretion, we can make decisions about the food we eat based on some of these considerations. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So hopefully they're already satisfied from all the answer from the Associate Professor Julian Cox, and I hope it's also answer your question online. But they have very limited time, and maybe it's come to the end of the session. Actually, I want to make a wrap up, but I think I want to keep it, questions. So it will, I believe this is not the end of our discussion. I hope this will be the opening. So this is the teaser, like a movie. This is only a teaser. So I hope that we have the next collaboration, next meeting, and also next international guest lecture, and invited Professor Cox again. So yeah, thank you very much for your insight, your knowledge sharing for today event. So yeah, I hope it's will be open our opportunity to do collaboration between ITPLN and also UNSW Sydney in the future. Yeah, okay, thank you very much. And I'm Nadia Paramita as the moderator. Apologize if there any mistaken, and thank you for your attention. And now to the Master of Ceremony, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Nadia Paramita, and please give a big applause to Associate Professor Julian Cox and Mrs. Nadia Paramita. Ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to our next agenda. There is handover certificates as a token of appreciation and take pictures together with Associate Professor Julian Cox. For that, I kindly invite that Associate Professor Dr. Pawenari, IPU ASEAN Engineering, to give appreciation to our speakers, Associate Professor Julian Cox. This is it, appreciation from Institute Technology PLN to our speakers, Associate Professor Julian Cox. Please give a big applause to our speaker today, Associate Professor Julian Cox from University of New South Wales, Sydney. We hope there is a next collaboration between Institute Technology PLN and also University of New South Wales, Sydney. And there are also certificates appreciation. Thank you very much, Prof. Have come to Indonesia to Institute Technology PLN. Please stand here, sir. Okay, the next appreciation is for our moderator for today, to Mrs. Nadia Paramita. There are also certificates, appreciation. Thank you for being our moderator for this session. And I kindly invite Dr. Widianita as International Academic Relations Manager, and also Mr. Stefan Stephen Yung Priyadi to take a picture together with Associate Professor Julian Cox. And also all the Institute Teknologi PLN Management. Okay. Thank you very much for all the distinguished guests. Thank you, and please take your seat. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the end of our event today. I am along with all of the committee apologize if there are mistakes and behavior that are not supposed to be. We would like to express our gratitude to all of the participants and to all of the audience. Thank you everyone. Good afternoon and goodbye. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
But also, I knew in terms of the introductory stuff, I thought.